God did not want His people to stay in the land of Goshen there in Egypt. They had settled down. They were comfortable. They thought they had it made, right? But they didn't. He sent a divine disturbance as an eagle stirs up her nest. But notice the part that's interesting here. So the Lord alone guided him. That is sometimes the only way God leads us, bringing disturbances into our lives, focusing our mind on Him. So when everything else has gone wrong, we are intimately focused on the one that can provide deliverance. So sometimes these divine disturbances, they are God's way of motivating His children. And He is over it all. But that leads us to the second thing. If there's a divine disturbance, there's also a definite design. What is God doing when He sends this disturbance to us? He's wanting us to focus on certain things that are here. And I've broken them down for you. And I think the first thing He's trying to get us to understand is that we should be committing ourselves to Him. He's wanting us to learn commitment. He's trying to get us to trust Him and Him alone. That's why He says in verse 12, the Lord alone guided him. There was no foreign god with him. But down in Egypt, there were a lot of strange gods. The people, they very well could have been tempted and trusted in these strange gods of Egypt. But God says, no, I'm going to get you out of this nest. I'm going to teach you to be committed to me and me alone. Me completely and totally. They, just like that baby eaglet, were going to be tossed out of the nest. And they were going to learn to rely on God. To be totally and utterly committed to Him. And Him alone. But that commitment turns to the second thing, which is confidence. Look in verse 13. He had him ride on the high places of the earth. From within the confines of that tiny nest, he never dreamt that he could ride on the high places of the earth. He never imagined that he could soar on these thermodrafts. But the Lord is teaching him how to trust. But here's the thing. Unless he was forced to, he would never learn how to fly. And I can tell you, friend, that there are times in my life I've been forced to trust God. And trust is sometimes a scary thing. If you ever did a more in-depth Bible study and you were trying to look up the Hebrew, the root of that word for trust in Hebrew, it has this connotation of being face down on the ground. And you say, well, that's kind of different than what we would normally say when we use the word trust. Well, in the Old Testament, I'll give you an illustration of what it might mean and the vivid picture that it paints. I want you to, in your mind's eye, to imagine a medieval knight. He's battle-worn, he's weary, and he's standing in this great hall and wearing all of his shiny yet dented and marred armor. Standing there in the hall of his sovereign, his sword has been taken from him, his armor there is left except for his helmet, and his great king looks him in the eye and says, kneel. And in that moment, that knight drops to one knee and then to both, until his head is bowed low and his forehead is facing that stone-cold floor. His hands are outstretched before him. He is not gripping any weapon, but he is open and he is empty. And in that moment, he has no shield to hide behind. He has no sword to swing. He has no defense of his own. His life and his honor, his future rest entirely in the mercy of the King. That's a picture of trust. Face down, no self-protection, no ability on your own. You are wholly and totally dependent on the one before you. There are times where God will force you into those positions so that you learn to trust Him. Where you have no other option. You can't muscle through it on your own. You can't intellectually find a way out. Where you must be totally and completely dependent on Him. There is no plan you can devise, no strength that you can summon. There is no leverage that you can use. There is only one choice, and you must bow low and trust Him. And when that happens, do you know the result? You should. He proves Himself faithful. He proves Himself to be faithful. You see, we might not be able to see it in the moment, but when He brings us to that place of utter surrender, that's why the verse says, the Lord alone will deliver them. No one else would be able to do it. None of the gods of Egypt could do what the Lord was going to do with His people. And He brought them to commitment. He brought them to learn confidence, to learn to trust Him. All so they could learn to fly. First of all, He makes them focus on the commitment. He'll stir up the nest. Then they will develop confidence. And after that, they experience conquest. God isn't being mean when He does this. Look in verse 13. He had him ride on the high places of the earth, and he ate the produce of the field, and he had him suck honey from the rock and oil from the flinty rock. God had so much ready and in store for His people. He wanted to bless them. But it wasn't in Egypt. It was in the land of Canaan that the blessings would come. So God had to move them in order for them to achieve conquest. Commitment, confidence, conquest. But here's the main thing. Communion. Do you remember back in verse 10, He said, He found him in a desert land, in the howling wasteland of a wilderness. He encircled him. He guarded him as the apple of His eye. Now you should highlight or circle that phrase, guarded him as the apple of His eye. We've all heard that phrase, right? That little boy is the apple of his daddy's eye. Who in this room knows what that means? We all have heard the phrase, but do any of us know what it means to be the apple of His eye? Well, what is the apple of your eye? In the Hebrew, that word apple, it speaks of an orb or something round, circular. So what is the round, orb-like, circular thing in your eye? Your pupil. Your pupil. That's the apple of His eye. But I want you to understand the context of what He's talking about here and where He's giving this phrase. If you walked up to me and I didn't have these bifocals on, and you stick your finger out like this and you're fixing to poke me in the eye, what do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to protect myself somehow. I'm going to close my eyes. I'm going to turn my head. I'm going to put my hands up. I'm going to do something and protect my eyes. That's just natural reaction. And what he's saying here is that's exactly what God does for His children. They are the apple of His eye, and He will guard them and protect His children. He keeps them. He loves them, just as a man loves and protects his own eyesight. So while our lives might be disturbed, we need to learn that it's not because God is being cruel. It's part of His plan that all things work together for good to those who love Him. But you know what's interesting about this? If you've looked at the chapter that we're in Deuteronomy chapter 32, if you've got a good study Bible, it will probably give you this heading. Because what are we reading here? It's not a history lesson. This isn't a narrative. It's a what? It's a song. A good study Bible will have the heading above verse 1 that says, a song of Moses. This is a hymn of praise written by Moses under the inspiration of God. And it's not just any song. It is the song of Moses that came at the very end of his life. He was 120 years old. He's standing on the threshold of the promised land, knowing he will never, ever step foot within it. You're reading some of his final words, and God does not tell him to give another sermon. He tells him to sing. Why? Why does He say, don't preach another sermon, sing a song? Because songs are memorable. Sermons fade. Songs will lodge in the heart. I've learned this more than most, but I'm fully aware that you will forget everything I've said this morning by Tuesday. Wednesday, if I'm lucky, right? And I could spend 20 hours crafting a message, poring over the Greek or the Hebrew, outlining it, polishing the illustrations, and 3 days later, somebody will come up to me and say, "Preacher, I appreciate that message you preached on Sunday." And I'll say something like, "Really, what spoke out to you the most?" And they'll say something like, "It was something about God." They've already forgotten it. Sermons fade. But if you teach someone the lyrics to Amazing Grace, 30 years later, they'll be able to hum every verse. God is giving him something here that is memorable. He's giving him something here to do what? Look in verse 19. "Now therefore write this song and teach it to the people of Israel. Put it in their mouths, that this song may be a witness for me." This song was to be a testimony. It was to be an anthem of the faithfulness of God, to reveal to them and help them to remember that in Israel's story, in its history, God was ever faithful. To every generation, they should remember the unwavering faithfulness of God. But it was both a song of warning and also a song of worship. It looks backward, recounting how God found His people in a desert land in the howling waste of the wilderness. But it also looks around, and it's showing how God carries them, cares for them, and has kept them as the apple of His eye. But if you kept reading, you would find that it also looks forward. It looks ahead, urging them to stay faithful. Because God, the very same God that has rescued them, is the one who will keep them. So the passage you're reading The song of Moses, it's like a covenant love song between God and His people. And the lyrics are saying, I bore you on eagle's wings, and I brought you to myself. That, folks, is communion. That is a relationship. That is commitment with all of the confidence and all of the conquest. It leads back to the fact that God is bringing His people closer to Him.